Hey guys, so today we are going to work on some terminology from ancient Egypt that is from early to old kingdom. And what we're going to do, while you guys follow along with the PowerPoint, we're going to fill out this graphic organizer, which will ask for the term, the definition, characteristics, so you can draw a picture here, the synonym and the antonym, and I would label that, and then your connection to other terms or civilizations. And then at the bottom here, we have this question that is, what is at the heart of a civilization? What similarities between civilizations did you observe? Be specific. And you will fill this part out yourself. So we're going to work through the first term together, and then as we go through the PowerPoint, you are going to fill out the rest. So we are going to begin here and remember that this is early to old kingdom. So our first term is hieroglyphics. So when we go back to our graphic organizer, we are going to write in hieroglyphics. And then for hieroglyphics, let me go back to the PowerPoint to show you the picture. So you can see that it's symbols, and a lot of the times they used pictures. And so what we see here is that in these two specific examples, they are in columns, and then sometimes you will see hieroglyphics in rows. And then we would read the same way that we do now with a book of going from left to right, but sometimes they have it where you're going to go from right to left, and how you know is what direction the animals are facing. So in this first one, we can see that the animals' faces are towards the right. So we're going to read left to right. And then in this other picture, we see that the animals' faces are going to the left. So we're going to read right to left. So back to our graphic organizer, and we can put a picture that represents an object, syllable, or word. And then here is where I can write some characteristics or draw an image. So for my purposes, I'm going to write some characteristics. So I can put columns and rows, reading left to right or right to left, and then the direction of the animals, determine which direction you read. So I just wrote out some basic things to help me remember some characteristics of hieroglyphics. And then over here, I want to put the synonym and the antonym of hieroglyphics. And for hieroglyphics, the synonym that we are going to put is symbols, and the antonym is going to be inactivity. Okay, and then we got to think about the connections to the other terms that we're going to use, or the civilization. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and give it to you, but when we go through the rest of the PowerPoint, I want you to pay attention to what connections we can make between the other terms. So for this one, we'll put hieroglyphics were said to have been created by the god Thoth and called them words of the gods. So that will be our connection, and you'll have to pay attention as we go through the PowerPoint of what we mean by god Thoth. Okay, so while I go through, go ahead and fill out your graphic organizer, and then the questions will be answered at the very end. So we have our hieroglyphics here that we discussed. Next, we have agriculture. Now with agriculture, we start to see this around 3150 BCE. And during this time, the pharaoh made those in the town work the fields. So those that had lower incomes, those were the ones that were in charge of keeping the fields intact. And then the fields were plowed by oxen, and as you can see in this picture here, that's where we've gotten the idea of tilling the lands, is having this tool back here that pushes up the dirt and then allows for it to turn. And we see that a lot in our farming these days if certain farmers don't have the equipment needed. And then meat didn't last long, so they were using a lot of crops. And the meat was more for the pharaoh or the rich because they could afford to just let that meat go to waste. They didn't have refrigerators like we do now. And so a lot of the people ate wheat, chickpeas, lentils, lettuce, corn, and then some other crops as well because they could store these crops and they wouldn't go bad as quickly as the meat would. And then for this one, our synonym is going to be farming. Our antonym is going to be industry. And then the connection that we see here is that the pharaoh had the lower class people farm the land. Okay, so now we're on to Pharaoh. So the pharaoh was the king, but he was also seen as the god of earth. And the term pharaoh didn't come about until the New Kingdom era. Before that, he was just known as the king, and then they decided to change it to pharaoh, and then that's when it lasted. But pharaoh also means great house, and this was to represent where the pharaoh lived, the amount of money that he had. And then the pharaoh's role as the leader was to participate in religious ceremonies and maintain religious harmony. And so for our synonym, we're going to do king. For our antonym, we're going to do slave. And then the connection to other terms, the pharaoh was always mummified. And you can see in our picture here that this was the special, as we would call now, coffin that the pharaoh would stay in. Okay, and then our next term is going to be an amulet. Now, many ancient Egyptians wore amulets as a symbol or for the protection that it was known to offer the owner. And this jewelry was known to offer that protection, that it had magical powers and that it would help keep whoever owned it out of trouble. Amulets were also used in the mummification process to connect the body. And so what they would do is, as they were mummifying the body, they would stick amulets throughout to protect different parts of the body as they were wrapping it. So our synonym for this one is going to be idol. Our antonym is going to be curse. And then our connection is that some amulets contained hieroglyphics, which would include animals or symbols. And as we can see with this one, it has what appears to be a mouse or a rat, and then there are symbols on top of that animal as well. Okay, and then our last one is going to be mummification. And as you can see in the picture, this is an actual mummy. You can see the wrappings around the body. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you through the process to mummify a person. So this is the process that happened when a person passed away, and there were 7 steps that they went through to preserve their bodies. The first is, of course, announcing the death of the person, making others aware. The second is embalming the body. This is where the body was cleaned with palm wine and water from the Nile River to make it pure. Next, they removed the brain and they just put it in water to dissolve, because at that time they didn't understand how great the brain is and or the qualities that the brain had. And so to them it wasn't important and they just got rid of it. But the other organs were then removed: the liver, the heart, the lungs, the intestines, and all of those organs were put into different jars. And those jars were specifically set to a different god, and in those jars they were going to be protected by that god. Then the body was covered with salt, and that was to remove any water that was still on the body. And that lasted for 40 days to ensure that all of the water was taken out of the body, because that's what creates the disintegration and the molding. Then, after those 40 days, the body was wrapped tightly as prayers and charms, also those amulets, were placed around the body for protection. And each part of the body is wrapped separately and then wrapped together. So for this one, our synonym is going to be condition. Our antonym is going to be danger. And then the connection to other terms, like we discussed a little bit ago, was that amulets are wrapped with the mummies to protect their body. So now that we have worked through these 5 different vocab words, and you have worked to fill out your graphic organizer, I want you to take some time and think about these 2 questions. What is at the heart of a civilization? And then what similarities between civilizations do you observe? I want you to at least put 4 or 5 sentences for these 2 questions.